Most people have heard these words before. The Lord is my shepherd. They are spoken beside hospital beds, read at funerals, whispered in moments of fear, and remembered when people are searching for comfort. Psalm 23 has become so familiar that it is easy to forget how powerful its imagery actually is. When David wrote these words, he was not describing a life untouched by suffering. David knew what it meant to face danger. He knew the wilderness. He knew what it was to be hunted by enemies, betrayed by people he trusted, and forced into circumstances where the future was anything but certain. Yet when David tried to describe his relationship with God, the image he chose was not that of a king sitting safely on a throne. It was a shepherd walking with his sheep. That image would have been deeply personal to him. Long before David became king of Israel, he had been a shepherd. He had spent his youth watching his father's flock in the countryside surrounding Bethlehem. He knew the responsibility of leading animals that depended almost completely upon their shepherd for survival. He understood the search for pasture and water, the danger of predators, the loneliness of the wilderness, and the responsibility of protecting a flock when no one else was there to help. So when David begins Psalm 23 with the words, "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want," he is saying far more than we might realize. A shepherd was responsible for the life of the flock. He had to know where food could be found and where water was safe. He had to recognize dangerous terrain, watch for predators, guide wandering sheep back toward the flock, and decide when it was time to move. The sheep could not see what waited beyond the next ridge. The shepherd could. That is the relationship David uses to describe his dependence upon God. He does not say that he understands everything happening around him. He does not claim to know where every road will lead. His confidence comes from believing that the shepherd does. And then David says, "I shall not want." Those words are sometimes understood as though David were promising that those who trust God will receive everything they desire. But David's own life makes that interpretation difficult. There were seasons when David possessed almost nothing. He lived as a fugitive. He slept in caves and wilderness strongholds. He experienced loss, grief, conflict, and consequences for his own failures. The image here is not unlimited wealth. It is provision. David believes that the shepherd knows what the sheep need, even when the sheep cannot provide those things for themselves. He continues, "He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside the still waters." To understand the power of that image, it helps to imagine the landscape David knew. The countryside of Judah could be beautiful, but it could also be dry, rocky, exposed, and unforgiving. Green pasture was precious, water was essential. A shepherd moving through this landscape could not simply assume that abundant grass and safe water would always be waiting nearby. He had to know the land. He had to know where the flock could feed, where water could be found, which paths were safe, and when the animals needed to move. The survival of the sheep depended upon the knowledge and judgment of the shepherd. David takes that familiar reality and turns it into a picture of God. "He maketh me to lie down in green pastures." There is rest in those words. The sheep are no longer wandering in search of food. They have been brought somewhere they can stop. "He leadeth me beside the still waters." Again, the emphasis is on the shepherd. David does not discover the water by himself. He is led there. His confidence does not come from believing that he can control every circumstance in his life. It comes from believing that God sees farther than he does. David may not know what lies beyond the next ridge, but the shepherd does. He may not see where provision will come from, but the shepherd knows where the water is. Then David writes, "He restoreth my soul. He leadeth me in the paths of righteousness for his name's sake." Now the image becomes even more personal. The shepherd does more than provide enough for David to survive. He restores him. David was a man who understood exhaustion, fear, grief, and failure. Scripture does not present him as flawless. Some of the darkest moments in his story came because of his own decisions. Yet the picture David gives us in Psalm 23 is not of a shepherd abandoning a damaged sheep. It is of a shepherd continuing to lead. He leadeth me in the paths of righteousness. Across the ancient landscape, shepherds and travelers followed paths through hills, valleys, rocky slopes, and wilderness. Choosing the wrong route could lead into dangerous terrain. Following the right one could lead toward water, pasture, shelter, and eventually home. David sees his life in similar terms. There are paths worth following, and there are paths that lead somewhere else. The shepherd does not simply provide comfort. He provides direction. And sometimes the kindness of a shepherd is precisely this. He does not allow the sheep to wander wherever they choose. Then the landscape of Psalm 23 suddenly changes. The green pasture disappears. The quiet water is gone. In their place stands something darker. "Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil." This is perhaps the most famous line in the entire psalm, but there is something important in David's wording. He does not say that following the shepherd prevents him from entering the valley. He assumes that there will be valleys. The same shepherd who leads beside still waters sometimes leads through dangerous places. David would have understood what such terrain could mean. The rugged landscape of Judah contains ravines, steep slopes, caves, narrow passages, and places where danger could remain hidden until someone was already close to it. Predators could threaten a flock. Thieves could take advantage of isolated terrain. Sudden weather or unstable ground could make travel difficult. A sheep entering such a place had very little ability to protect itself. Yet David says, "I will fear no evil." Why? Not because the valley is harmless, not because the darkness is imaginary, and not because David suddenly understands everything that is happening. His reason is contained in the next few words. "For thou art with me." That may be the center of the entire psalm. The promise David describes is not that there will never be a valley. It is the presence of the shepherd inside the valley. There is also a subtle change in the way David speaks. Earlier in the psalm, David speaks about God. "He maketh me, he leadeth me, he restoreth my soul." But when David enters the valley, the language changes. Now he speaks directly to God. "Thou art with me." It is as though the darkness makes the relationship more immediate. The landscape becomes more dangerous, but the shepherd feels closer. David continues, "Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me." The shepherd carried tools suited to his work. The staff could assist with guidance and movement through difficult terrain. The rod represented protection and authority. Together, they form a picture of a shepherd capable both of directing the flock and defending it. David finds comfort in both. Guidance and protection, direction and defense. The shepherd does not point toward the valley and send the sheep through it alone. He enters with them. Imagine the scene David's words create. A flock moving through a narrow valley as daylight begins to disappear. Stone rises around them. Every sound travels through the ravine. The sheep remain close together because they cannot see what may be hiding farther ahead. But somewhere among them is the shepherd. The sheep do not need to understand the geography of the entire journey. They need to know where the shepherd is. David's confidence rests on the same idea. He cannot predict everything that will happen tomorrow. He cannot see every danger before it arrives, but he believes he knows the character of the one leading him. Then, without warning, Psalm 23 changes imagery again. Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of mine enemies. David moves from the wilderness to a table. The shepherd imagery gives way to the imagery of hospitality, honor, and abundance. But notice something extraordinary. The enemies are still there. David does not say that God prepares a table after every enemy has disappeared. The table is prepared in the presence of mine enemies. The threat remains visible, yet David is being cared for anyway. That changes the meaning of the scene. Peace is no longer dependent upon the complete absence of opposition. David can sit at the table even while his enemies remain because his security does not ultimately depend upon them. The enemies do not decide whether the table can be prepared. God does. Then David says, Thou anointest my head with oil, my cup runneth over. Oil carried important associations throughout the ancient world. It could be connected with hospitality, refreshment, honor, and consecration. For David, the image would have carried another deeply personal memory as well. He had once been the overlooked shepherd boy standing among his brothers when the prophet Samuel took oil and anointed him. Now, near the end of Psalm 23, David again speaks of being anointed. And his cup is no longer merely full. It overflows. At the beginning of the psalm, David declared, I shall not want. By the end, the imagery has moved beyond having enough to survive. David pictures abundance. The valley was real. The enemies were real. The danger was real. But none of them became the final destination. The shepherd was still leading. Then David arrives at the final verse. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life. Those words become especially powerful when we remember the life of the man saying them. David knew what it meant to be followed. For years, King Saul pursued him. Enemies hunted him. Armies moved against him. Political rivals threatened his kingdom. Even members of his own family would eventually become sources of heartbreak and rebellion. And some of David's deepest suffering came from the consequences of his own actions. He knew what it felt like to look behind him and wonder who was coming. Yet when David looks at his entire life through the language of Psalm 23, he sees something else following him. Goodness and mercy. Not only during the peaceful seasons, not only during moments of victory, all the days of my life. The days in the pasture and the days in the valley. The days when David stood victorious before Israel, and the days when he hid from enemies in the wilderness, the moments of extraordinary faith and the moments of painful failure. Through all of them, David believes the shepherd has remained. And then comes the final destination. And I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. Psalm 23 begins with a shepherd and his sheep moving through the landscape. It ends with David at home with God. Everything between those 2 points is a journey. There are green pastures and still waters. There are paths that must be followed. There is restoration. There are valleys where death seems frighteningly close. There are enemies who do not disappear. There is a table prepared in their presence. There is an overflowing cup. There is goodness. There is mercy. And finally, there is home. Perhaps that is one reason Psalm 23 has remained one of the most loved passages of Scripture for thousands of years. It does not describe a world in which faithful people never suffer. David knew far too much about life to make such a claim. Instead, Psalm 23 offers something different. It asks where our confidence comes from when the landscape changes. It is easy to speak about the shepherd while standing in green pasture. The deeper question comes when the path descends into the valley and we can no longer see what waits ahead. David's answer is not that he suddenly understands the journey. His answer is, "Thou art with me." That is the heart of Psalm 23. The shepherd provides when the land is barren. He leads when the path is uncertain. He restores when the sheep are exhausted. He remains when the valley becomes dark. He protects when danger approaches. He prepares a table while enemies are still watching. And he continues leading until the journey finally reaches home. The most important thing about the valley, then, is not how dark it becomes. It is whether the sheep are walking through it alone. For David, the answer was clear. The Lord is my shepherd. And if the shepherd is still leading, then the valley is not the end of the story.